Good morning. Good morning once again. My name is Geoffrey, as Judy has introduced me. And I was supposed to give this presentation tomorrow, but she has explained that I have some emergencies to attend to. But anyway, I work with the Economic Commission for Africa. Our office is based in Kigali, Rwanda, and we have our headquarters in Addis Ababa. So I think this meeting we're having today is very, very relevant to what we're doing in the region. And I think when Judy asked me to talk about this, I was trying to reflect on some of the things we've done and to think about how we can relate to what is going on, this whole issue about green economy, greening tourism, and so forth. So I thought I'll focus my presentation on the key issues that also sort of what tourism is all about when you think about Africa, or in particular the Eastern African region. And so it's like, well, the title is Towards Sustainable Tourism Development in Eastern Africa. So looking at some of the challenges and opportunities, and then we'll see what we're trying to do in terms of progressing this tourism agenda in the region. What we've seen in the past few decades, tourism has grown significantly globally. We've seen from numbers of about 438 million in 1990s, growing to about 1 billion. We're looking at the projections being quite optimistic for tourism globally. But the challenge is that when you think about tourism in Africa, despite the rapid growth the continent is experiencing, the percentage in terms of share is still very, very insignificant. We're talking about 5% in terms of international arrivals, and talk about 3.4% in terms of tourism receipts. This is quite insignificant. We're talking about the tourism industry generating about $1.2 trillion and that sort of thing. But in Africa, when you look at Africa, this is the amount that tourism generates in the continent is still very insignificant. Now, as a result of the importance of tourism, we've seen a lot of countries turning to tourism. We've seen countries that were, including developed countries, that are now turning to tourism, especially those that have been closing down the industrial parks are turning to tourism as a viable alternative for economic development. The same applies to Africa. I'll give some figures to show you just how important tourism is and why countries are turning to tourism. Now, within Africa, owing to the recognition of the importance, I'm not sure if some of you know about this African Union and NEPA Tourism Action Plan that was signed by tourism ministers in 2006. Unfortunately, nothing much has been happening on the ground, despite that important document being signed. Within the East African context, a lot of member states are beginning to recognize the importance of tourism in that sense. But as I said, within the Eastern African region, there are still several challenges, and the full potential of tourism is yet to be realized. So really, basically, the purpose of this presentation is to highlight the challenges and opportunities for sustainable tourism development in Eastern Africa. The national parks and reserves developed into major centers of safari tourism activities, hosting increasing numbers of international tourists, particularly from the Western countries such as Germany, United Kingdom, and so forth. A number of international conservation and tourism-related organizations, I think some of them are presented here today, played significant roles in the design and development of conservation and tourism programs. Some of these programs include such as the Cobra project. I think this was the conservation of biodiverse resource areas. This was in the 1980s. As the CBNRM, community-based natural resource management programs, the campfire projects, and so forth. So those are the programs that have been developed to try and ensure that there is meaningful interchange between local communities and the national parks. But why do I give this historical perspective? This is therefore critical towards enabling an understanding of the challenges we know them today, and also to enable an understanding of how best to exploit opportunities that such natural resources present for tourism development for the benefit of all, especially indigenous communities that have sacrificed a lot in the past for the sake of tourism development. I think first of all what we're getting from here today is that we need to relieve the pressure on our protected areas, which is, as we've seen, is going to increase in the future because of population increase and so forth. Now, to ensure the sustainability, we have to limit the number of facilities. In fact, we can even go to the extreme and actually have no facilities in these protected areas. In my view, that's the only way we can enhance the sustainability. I gave the example of protected areas in Europe, for example, which have minimal resources, minimum facilities in those protected areas. Yet we in Africa have actually gone to the opposite direction of actually maximizing facilities in the protected areas. As you know, this will have an impact in terms of their sustainability, issues relating to pollution, issues relating to issues of noise pollution and so forth. And in the long run, actually, this has an impact also on the habitat for which the wild animals, for example, rely on. You know, it diminishes the value of these places. In my view, that the future of protected areas, those ones that will be of high value, will be the ones that have no facilities in them, or have minimum facilities in them. Okay. Now, the other issue that you mentioned talked about the issue of tourism facilities not being adapting to the situations and realities on the ground, in the sense that they're being rigid in their, for example, their pricing strategies and so forth. I think this is a big challenge, and if we have seen from successful destinations, those that are very developed, they have adopted some of these strategies that have helped them to achieve their goals in terms of profitability. Now, I gave the examples of what we have here in the region. People, especially hotel owners, do not understand the nature of the tourism business. If you don't sell your room today, you're never going to recover that money again. The issue of the reachability, for example. So when you have this rigid approach to running your business, you're going to run into problems in future. Okay? We've seen destinations like South Africa that are very, very competitive. We talk about price competitiveness here. Our destination is viewed to be very expensive. But it's precisely for those reasons. There's the issue of scarcity, but there's also the issue. And the issue of scarcity is to do with seasonality. When we have such big conferences like the World Trade Organization conference, we had the World Economic Forum in Rwanda, for example, people get excited because they're able to charge $400, $500 for a room that they normally charge maybe $100. But those are very seasonal. So what happens in between is what is very important, and that's where maybe if you want to tap into the regional market, the domestic market, the people have to be very, very strategic in terms of tapping into these emerging markets. We're given the examples. For example, we talked about in Kenya. I think Carmen mentioned that there are about 10 million middle-class Kenyans. These are people traveling out of the country. Outbound tourism. To what extent do we understand the nature of outbound tourism? Do we even study it? Do we understand what Kenyans are looking for out there? Of course, the main beneficiaries are in countries like South Africa, you know, Dubai. And Dubai and so forth. So we need to take these issues very, very seriously if we're to tap into and the problem we are facing here is the nature of the tourism product. We need to rethink our tourism product if you're to tap into these emerging markets. Okay. That is why the other destinations are able to tap into, to attract Kenyans to travel to these destinations. You know, they have a different model. They have something that appeals to the Kenyans. I think the way we've been thinking about culture tourism in Kenya is somewhere wrong, because when someone goes to Masai Mara, for example, they're taken to the Manyara and the people come out and start singing, and that's a very wrong concept, a wrong way of really developing culture tourism. Culture tourism, in my view, should be meaningful. And we're not just looking at traditional cultures, you know. Even to talk about traditional cultures and so forth, I gave the example of a country like Ethiopia, where that sort of cultural element is not really for the tourists. It's for the locals themselves. You go to the restaurant, they're doing their cultural dances, the sikistas and so forth. And they're not really, there are 2 or 3 restaurants in Addis Ababa, for example, which are geared towards the tourists. But the rest of them, they're for the locals. And to me, that is where, as a tourist going to Addis Ababa, you derive the maximum enjoyment, maximum experience, maximum benefits, and so forth. So we need to think from that perspective. Let's not stage our culture for tourism purposes. Let's let it be meaningful. Then the other thing is that when you talk about culture, there's what we call contemporary culture. It's not just traditional culture. What do we have, for example, in urban areas, for example? You know, things like that sort of tend to appeal to a
audience. If you think about cities like London, New York, and so forth, their West End and all these things, these are sort of the things that we also need to start thinking about in terms of how we can. And I gave the example of trying to market our cities as destinations. You know, what is the culture in Nairobi? What do people do in Nairobi in terms of entertainment and so forth and that sort of thing? These appeals more to the regional market. And I'm sure if a Nairobian went to Mombasa, they're able to enjoy Mombasa because Mombasa has got something different to offer than what Nairobi has to offer, and vice versa. My closing thoughts are that if you're to take tourism development seriously now and into the future, we have to think of how we can create attractions. Because for a long time we've relied on our natural attractions, but increasingly now we need to start thinking more creatively. Have issues into innovation, innovative tourism products and so forth, and these will only be informed by research and development. So the future is based on how research can inform the future of tourism development in our region and in our country.